This webinar will introduce this Jewish tradition of reading the Torah. We're going to learn how the Jews, they fully read it, they continuously read it every week for the whole entire year, portion by portion. Now we're going to learn together the roots of this custom of reading the Torah that traces back all the way to the pages of the Hebrew Bible, both the Old Testament as well as later in the New Testament, that also holds more information about this practice of reading the Torah, studying the Torah, and as well all the way until today. Still the Jews in the synagogues do read and study the Torah. So we're gonna go together how it started, give you some hints from the Bible, how it started in the Old Testament, how it continued in the New Testament, all the way until today. And this will help us more understand what happened at Jesus' time in the first century in the synagogues. This will, like this custom and rituals will help us understand the times, better understand the times of Jesus in the first century. So again, this course gonna start on November the 6th for 6 lessons. Now I'm gonna just give you introduction about a webinar or about this course. Now we'll talk a little bit about the word Torah and its original meaning. Actually means teachings or law, and it's more like not like just commandments or law. It is more direction, it is more guidance, and its original word, original through letters, come from this 3 Hebrew letters. Like every Hebrew word, there are 3 root letters, Yud, Resh, and He, or Y, R, and H. And one of the meanings of Yara, or the verb to shoot, Yara, like to proclaim, to instruct, like a teacher who shoots like the wisdom into the hearts of his student, right to the point, all right? Not missing the goal, just going right to the point. So Yara is to shoot right to the point. As we know, like the 5 books of Moses in the Bible are called the Pentateuch. These 5 books are read constantly in its entirety in a set of consecutive portions or parts. Each week, a new one portion. So the word parasha for the Jews means an episode or a story. You're gonna hear this word a lot as I'm gonna teach this lesson today together. I'll be using this word a lot. So it's like it's a story that has a certain theme. So the Bible or the Torah, the Jewish 5 books, are not divided like our Christian division into Genesis, in Deuteronomy, Leviticus, and so on. It's divided into portions, into themes, into stories. So to sum up about the Torah, it is to answer the questions, how shall like we live? Like the more Torah, the more we study, the more we learn, the more guidance we get, and the more direction we have in our lives. This is how people would know the will of God for them in those periods, is to find the purpose of life. So the more Torah is, the more guidance, the more life they're gonna get. The more they're gonna reach right to the point, right, the purpose of their creation. So this is like how shall we live? This is how the people in the Old Testament wanted to live. Now again, Pentateuch in Latin, actually, penta, everybody as you're familiar with, means 5, and Theoch means scrolls. So Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So are these five books. Now, I don't know if you're aware, when a Jewish boy becomes 13 years old, now this is the age that he becomes responsible. This is the age when he starts to learn or to study the Torah. like when he becomes responsible, his parents put him to the hands of God. That is God's responsibility at the moment. And the first book that the Jews start to study would be the book of Leviticus. All right, and this is like many times we as Christians ignore that book. And you have to know, between all these five books, there is no hierarchy. Like there's no book that is important than the other book. All of them are important for the Jews. So we know that back then, like in the old times, it was all tradition. All right. But if you look at the picture here and you see the finding of Moses, and because Moses was educated in the course of Egypt, he would, it's very possible, because he was placed in Pharaoh's house, that he learned and had the best education. So it's very possible when God commanded him in the wilderness to write the Torah, that traditionally that Moses have written the Torah when he was traveling out of Egypt with the Jewish people in the wilderness. Now, like we're gonna try together understand the text. Actually, the fact that like we lack a lot of information about biblical times compared to our life today. We are looking like for a long period of time, which was like different events, different parts of the world, different language, even a different culture. So we today we don't really necessarily can understand what was going on in the old days, and understand all the practices that happened at that time. So at that time, people who were listening would understand what had been said. There are certain details that were familiar to them at that time that we today don't necessarily know about it. So really time separates. But nevertheless, we know that we have a baby science, archaeology, because in the Bible history, we read about the past, but in the biblical archaeology, we're gonna study more, you investigate more the past. Today, there are so many findings that were found in the land here that goes along with the Bible and will proves also the stories of the Bible and enrich us about the culture of that time. Especially, it's very interesting for archaeologists when they found something written. So they can know the period of time, they can find which king it belonged to. So it's like all of this discovered in the land. I'm gonna give you in this webinar a few examples of that. But again, this will the places that were discovered reconnect us to the past and help us understand the past in our days today. So we're gonna learn about mainly this custom of reading the Torah and try to understand it from the little hints that we're gonna find it in the text. As I told you, I'm gonna start with the Old Testament, continue to the New Testament, and all the way to our days to show you how this custom of reading the Torah started. So let's try to find the roots or the origin of this custom from hints of the Torah. We'll start by reading this verse from the Old Testament, Joshua 1, verse 8. And this is what God commands Joshua. This book of the law shall not depart out of your mouth. You shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. Now, this is a very, very interesting verse. And possibly this is the origin of practicing to read and study the Torah that goes back to the biblical times. God commands Joshua to constantly read the book of the Torah. So here we see this very ancient instruction to read it day and night, to meditate on it, to think about it. So this was a very first command, if you can see, right after the end of the Torah. Remember, we said the Torah were the 5 books that Moses have written, but Joshua comes right after the law, after the instructions. And in the very first chapter of Joshua 1, after the Torah ends, after the book of Deuteronomy, actually, this is when God commands Joshua to read and meditate on the Torah. Now, as well, we read as well in 2nd Chronicles chapter 34, when we look about Josiah, the reform of Josiah, the king of Josiah. Just a very quick background. This king Josiah, when he was 8 years old, he was crowned as a king, but he decided he wanted to follow God, not like the wicked ways of his father and of his grandfather Manasseh. So it was really dark times in the history of Israel after the kingdom was divided and very bad kings start to rule. But how he can teach the people the ways of God without having the laws or without having God's way. The people won't continue to worship the false gods. But King Josiah, he began to search for God, and he began to repair the temple, actually. And that King Solomon has built, because it went into this repairs. He sent laborers, carpenters, builders to set the work and repair. Also, the building was damaged. So we know that the Levites supervised the work, and while they were doing the repairs, the high priest found a very important discovery in the temple. Hidden from view was a scroll containing the book of God's law, and immediately as King Josiah heard about it, he called a meeting for everyone in Jerusalem, in Judah, along with the priests and the Levites, and the king read the words of God's laws to everyone. Then he promised to obey them with all his heart and soul, and then the people promised to do the same. So I'm going to just read one verse from 2nd Chronicles chapter 34, which is verse 30. He went up to the temple of the Lord with the people of Judah. This is King Josiah. The inhabitants of Jerusalem, the priests and the Levites, all the people from the least to the greatest. He read in their hearing all the words of the book of the covenant, which had been found in the temple of the Lord. So this king, then we can read afterwards, he ordered the priests to remove all the idols and the items in the temple that have been used to worship the false gods, and destroyed all the sacred pagan altars in the land, and all the figures were pulled down and even grounded to dust of other small gods than God himself. And even the pagan priests who led the people into wickedness were rounded up and executed. So this is all happened in the reform of Josiah. But the most important is that the Bible describes Josiah as a king who did what was right in the eyes of God. And especially he was reading, when he found the books of the scroll, he was reading for the people in public, in front of all the assembly. And we can also find other evidences in the books of the Bible as well. For example, in the book of Nehemiah, in chapter 8, where the custom of reading the Torah appears here as well. We know that during later the Persian period, when the Jews started to return back from the exile, and after Nehemiah builds the walls of Jerusalem, now thousands of people gathered to hear the Jewish leader Ezra reading God's laws to them. You know, Nehemiah was more the leader, but Ezra was more the priest for the people. And Ezra read the entire Torah in front of the community of the Judeans who came back from the Babylonian exile. And Ezra read it for hours and hours, and there were many teachers as well in the crowds helping people to understand the text. And just very quickly, I'll read these two verses from Nehemiah chapter 8, verse 2 and 3. The priest Ezra brought the law before the assembly, both men and women, and all who could hear with understanding. This was on the first day of the 7th month. He read from it in the presence of the men and the women and those who could understand, and the ears of all the people were attentive to the book of the law. So what can we learn from these verses about this custom of reading the Torah, or how it was performed? Remember, this was like in the old times, but imagine we are living today like at that time, and you want to know and to understand what happened. But these few interesting like hints that we have to notice, like if you pay attention, first we see it is like important to know that this is evident of a public reading of the Torah before the assembly. And that's a very important piece of evidence that we find about the origin of this custom. And even secondly, in the third verse, we see that everybody was there, all the people, not just for the priest alone, it is for everybody. So this is a very important evidence of custom of reading the Torah for everybody in public, that is even practiced later in the New Testament and even stayed until today. So when we look at this text, we can see these evidences. In the days of Nehemiah, that it was already a practice to read, to study to the public on a special like occasions, like in this occasion when they rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem. All right, if we jump into the New Testament, we find more pieces of evidences. Now we know after the destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans, the synagogues became more important for prayers and for studying, and became to be more common and more central, as well as the custom of reading the Torah. So now there's a very important source from the 1st century, because archaeologists found many synagogues all over the land, and especially in Galilee, that goes back to that period, to the period of the 1st century, 2nd century BCE. And all these finds attest to the existence of these synagogues in the 1st century. And I would like to choose one classical example of the ruins of the synagogue of Magdala. You can see here the middle of the courtyard of the synagogue. If you notice the basalt black stone, we know this is in Galilee. And why I chose this synagogue, because archaeologists are quite very positive that Jesus first visited the synagogue in Magdala. Because when you travel from Nazareth, you want to go to Galilee, your first stop actually is Magdala. That's where you're going to stop, recharge, get some salted fish, and then get the boat and continue to the northwestern shore, to the Capernaum area and all that area. So it is very important to understand that there were synagogues already, and that was a custom to read the Torah every week. And we're going to start by reading Matthew 4, verse 23. We read, and Jesus went about all Galilee teaching in their synagogues. So this was already a custom. Now, we have also this custom occurring at the Nazareth village, at the Nazareth synagogue. We know the well-known scene of Luke chapter 4. Jesus returned to his hometown in Nazareth, and on Saturday, he went to the synagogue as his custom was. And these are verses that attest to the reading of the Torah in the synagogues. So again, what we can learn from these verses about the custom of reading the Torah, for example, going definitely to the synagogue every Saturday. There are a few words here, also in the New Testament text that tell us this was already a practice. You see here, in verse 16, as was his custom, he stood up to read. So this verse is a strong evidence that this was already a custom in the synagogue to stand up and read publicly part of the Torah on Shabbat. And if we continue to read as well in verse 17, that he was handed, the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. In the synagogue, after reading actually the Torah portions of the week from the Torah, there is also another part that is read from the prophets together as well. So the important thing that we see this custom going to the synagogues every Saturday to stand up and read, it was already practiced at the time of Jesus as well. And actually there are 7 people who read the portion, and the 8th person who is handed the book of the prophets, this is called the Haftarah, or the scroll we know of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. I'm going to talk a little bit more about it as we go in, how Jesus came and read this part of the prophets, because every Torah portion have also a theme in the prophets, in the book of the prophets, and from that portion the theme was from the book of Isaiah. Now the question is, was he listening to the same portions and following the same annual cycle that we know today, that the Jews do today? We'll try to answer this question. There is a very famous Jewish historian born in the land. His name is Josephus, from the 1st century. So he was almost like not more than 100 years after Jesus was alive. And this is what he writes. He writes, people have to leave off their other employments and to assemble together for the hearing of the law and learning it exactly, and this not once or twice or oftener, but every week. And even later we read in the book of Acts, this was during the first, like let's say, Jerusalem conference, where James, the leader of the Jerusalem church, this is what he writes and tells explicitly in chapter 15. For Moses has had throughout many generations those who preach him in every city, being read in the synagogues every Sabbath. So again, the New Testament is attesting to this custom. And even after the New Testament, even the Apostle Paul and the first believers, this continues in the book of Acts. We know that it was a regular custom for the Apostle Paul as well to attend the synagogues every Shabbat. Like I'll read for you from Acts 18, chapter 18, verse 4. Every Sabbath, he reasoned in the synagogue. This is like the Apostle Paul, trying to persuade Jews and Greeks. And even there is another hint as well from Acts 18, chapter 18, verse 19. And they came to Ephesus, and he left them there, but he himself went into the synagogue and reasoned with the Jews. So according to the New Testament, or the testimony of the New Testament, as well as the writings of Josephus that we read earlier, this public reading of the Torah was proclaimed and practiced every Sabbath in every synagogue. Now, we know in the 1st century, Judaism was pluralistic, and there was more than one sect. There were more than one direction of teaching in Judaism. They all believed in God, but they had different ways. We know of the Sadducees, for example, that sided with the Romans. We know of the Zealots who fought the Romans. We know of the Pharisees who didn't take a side, but also we know of the Essenes who ran away and went to the desert. And what is important about the Essenes is that they left us the Dead Sea Scrolls that was found. This is the most or the biggest archaeological find in the 20th century. They found the whole books of the Bible written on parchments of kosher animals, probably sheep animals. You after you slaughter the sheep, you dry the skin, and then you bring another part. You can sew it together, and this is why a scroll can go for like very long, for a few meters, and you need few minutes to roll it in and to roll it out before you start to read. And what is really, really amazing, which I can call a miracle, that these scrolls that went back all the way from the 2nd century BCE, because they were preserved in jars, in caves, where the temperature was stable, were able to survive 2,000 years. And were recently discovered by accident. So this is like a very strong evidence that the Old Testament is preserved. This is the only complete like Old Testament that goes back the oldest from the 2nd century BCE. It's really an amazing, a very strong evidence to prove the Bible. But from ancient times until today, we know like reading or public reading, you have to know the text by heart because it didn't have markings of the text in ancient times. There is no punctuations, there is no points or commas, and the letters were all connected together. So it's not really easy to read the Torah at that time. But they would use you see here like a stick, a silver pointer. They use a ritual hand again because it's so holy for them to point with their fingers. But versus the books that we have today, nowadays, we have extra markings, we have vocalization, we have cantillation. So today it's easier, even it's divided whom to read for the 8 people to read and what to read together with the Haftarah, with the book of the prophets is also added. So today is much more easier. But again, this pointer or a hand, a yad in Hebrew, it's made of silver when they use it when they read the Torah rather than using their fingers because it's too holy to touch. And they respect this book so much that I'm sure you are aware, you saw in every synagogue, there is like a special cupboard that they put and preserve the Torah in it. Because for the Jews, it's a very important object that they possess the Torah. Because this is their guide that leads them for life, that was given by God to Moses. So this is the pointer, the silver pointer, the yad. Now, reading the Torah cycle, all the way we saw from the Old Testament, from the Second Temple period as well, from the First Temple to the Second Temple period, we are familiar with this custom that reading the Torah in its entirety, every verse and every word in consecutive portions that are called parashot. But where did this custom originated? Or this 1-year cycle was established in the exile in Babylon. And eventually it was accepted by all. Now, after the Jews continue the cycle, the whole year cycle, there's a special festival. Actually, at the end of all the Jewish holidays, is something called Simchat Torah, or the joy of the Torah. And this is how you see here, like people dance, rejoice after they finish reading that cycle. And the last person to read the parasha of that year to start the new year is called Hatan Torah, or the groom of the Torah. And you see him here holding the Torah and going in the streets and rejoicing because the next morning, that's when they're going to start a new cycle of the Torah, right from the beginning, right afresh from the beginning. So this is like just a little bit to help you understand this parashot that does not necessarily correspond to the division that we have into chapters, like in our Christian Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. But the parasha gets its name from probably the first word or verse in the book. For example, Bereshit. This is the first word of the book of Genesis. It's not named Genesis. It's named Bereshit, in the beginning. And I just chose you to give you an example of the first parashot of every book, Bereshit, in the beginning. So that story starts from Genesis 1 until almost Genesis 6, chapter 6, verse 8. So this is the first parasha. So the whole book is divided to parashot. So in this Torah portions, it tells the story of the word creation. And the haftarah of this portion is also taken from the book of Isaiah, when Isaiah introduces God as the beginning, as the one who created the heavens and stretched them out, who made the earth and all that grows in it. This is from Isaiah chapter 32, and so on. And then it continues Shemot or names, Exodus. Actually, no Exodus, but it's called Shemot, which means names. And this is from Exodus 1, chapter 1 to verse 6. And it continues, Leviticus is Vaikra. Vaikra means, and he called. So from Leviticus 1 to 5. Bamidbar, in the wilderness. This is from Numbers 1. Because the first verse is said in number 1:1, the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai, in the tent of meeting, on the first day of the second month, in the second year, after they had come out of the land of Egypt. So they choose the word in the wilderness to give the theme of the parasha, Bamidbar, in the wilderness, from Numbers 1, chapter 1 till 4. And then in Deuteronomy, it's called Dvarim, which means the words. So from Deuteronomy 1 to Deuteronomy 3. So there are in a year up to 54 parashot. Sometimes now, if a year is shorter or longer, they join two parashot together, or a big one, they divide it. But usually in every year, there are up to 54 parashot that are like have a weekly schedule. Read in the synagogue several times, actually 3 times in the week, on Mondays, Thursdays, and Saturday morning. And in Saturday evening, they start the next episode or the next parasha to follow the next week parasha. Now, again, as I told you earlier, each portion or parasha is divided to 7 sections. Like we have 8 readers. Remember the 7 sections, and then we have the maftir. Remember the one who reads from the book of the prophets that is related to the parasha. And even some Bibles include, or they have a note in the section for the 8 readers. So the haftarah is a section from the book of the prophet that is read after the parasha. And they were chosen to accompany like the specific theme of that parasha that shares the same idea more or less. So the 8 people reading in the Shabbat service, 7 people read different parts of the portion, and the 8th person reads what we call the haftarah, the prophets, all right, that relates to the theme of that weekly portion. So it's very mostly possible that when the parasha was read already at the time of Jesus in the 1st century, this is when Jesus comes and read the haftarah, read the parts of the prophets, reads the eighth part. So we can like understand now what really happened in the 1st century when Jesus came up to read, and he was handed the scroll of Isaiah. Why he was handed the scroll of Isaiah? That would be the haftarah. So again, 3 times a week the portion is read, and even until today, even before they start to read the portion, there is a prayer, there is a blessing that goes along together. And not only before reading the portion, even after reading the portion and reading the prophets, the haftarah, they end as well in prayer. So it says, this is how the Jews in the synagogues until today pray before they read the Torah. They pray together with the congregation. Bless God for whom our blessing is due. Blessed be God to whom our blessing is due forever and ever. Blessed are you, our Lord, our God, King of the universe, he who has chosen us for all the peoples and has given us the Torah. Blessed are you, O Lord, giver of the law. So really the Torah represents everything that the Jews stand for. Now, it is the greatest gift that God has given to them and to the whole world. So that's why they stand and bless it with a deep reverence. So again, it's part, the Torah portions, I want to tell you, it's even more, it's part of the identity of the Jewish people. I'm going to finish with this, all right? Most Jews know like the Torah portion that is related to their bar mitzvah, when they had the bar mitzvah. Even it's like vows in our Christian world today, part of what we are. And even it's important for them to find the Torah portion connected to their date of birth. So for God, like give us life. So it is up to us to give ourselves this gift of living well. Now, we're gonna put on the chat a link. We're gonna put it on the chat a link. And if you like, you can press on that link and it will open for you a page, and you just simply enter your date of birth, and it will automatically give you the Torah portion of that week of your birth. And even it gives you the Haftarah as well, the reading of the prophets. You're welcome to do that if you are interested. In a way, helps you to connect with the Jews. In a way, it will be weird if you want to build a relation with a Jew to go to visit his synagogue. It's not like us, we Christians would love people to come to church. No, it will be very weird. But you can start by talking about the Torah portions of your birth. You can join his bar mitzvah. You can join their festivals, their weddings as well. That would be more normal, but not to go to a synagogue. They would look at you differently. So as I said, I like to conclude, and because the Torah is so much important. And on November the 6th, as you can see, we'll start our first Torah portion. It's called Bereshit. Parashat Bereshit, the portion of Bereshit. And at the beginning, Genesis 1, chapter 1, verse 1 to chapter 6, verse 8. So you're going to see how the Jews look at the Bible. We're going to see it from the Jewish point of view, which will enrich our faith. Definitely will enrich our faith.